Thank you. Freedom, endowed by our Creator, defined by our Constitution, but defended each and every day by the men and women who proudly wear the uniform of these United States. Before we go any further, would anyone who serves in the military today, anyone who served as a veteran in the past, and for that matter, would anyone who is a family member of a service member or veteran, would you please stand at this moment? Thank you. I appreciate that. That includes all of you, and it includes the Senate President who just stood up here as a military veteran himself. And so for me to acknowledge that, to talk about freedom, which I'm going to talk about here quite a bit for the next few minutes, it's important to remember where those freedoms come from. You know, they're endowed from up above, but defined by the Constitution. But we wouldn't have them without the men and women that you just saw stand up and the families that represent them not only here but across this great country. It's also an honor to be introduced not only by the leader of the state Senate here in Colorado, but someone from Colorado Springs, because on November 2nd, 1967, I was born in what's now called Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs. My parents had come out from northern Illinois, where they were raised. My dad was an associate pastor for Christian education at First Baptist Church in downtown Colorado Springs, where the church is still there today. In fact, a few years ago, after I was first elected governor, the first time, in 2010, we went to a new governor's conference. It was at the Broadmoor, but on Sunday, instead of going to the sessions that morning, we went over to First Baptist, and my wife got a taste of hearing all after service from one late 70 to 80-year-old woman after another who said, "I used to hold your husband in my arms in the nursery." So it was kind of fun. And so we love to keep coming back to Colorado, my birth state. And know there's folks not only from Colorado, but all across the West and all across the country here. Thank you for coming out. And it really is an honor. I also want to say thanks, because I know for many of you here, you know, Senator Cadman talked about this, but a few years ago, we had a few visitors in Wisconsin. In fact, so many of you here in that recall election helped us out. You helped us out. Many of you sent 20 or 30 bucks. Many of you made phone calls from afar. Some of you even traveled all the way to Wisconsin. We appreciate that. But most of all, on behalf of Tonette and I and our family, our boys, Matt and Alex, so many of you told us you prayed for us. And I just got to tell you what a difference that made to us. Thank you so much for doing that. My only request going forward would be don't stop, because we need the prayers now more than ever. And we appreciate it because, as Senator Cadman mentioned, we had at one point over 100,000 protesters in our capital. In fact, if you may not remember this, but the Occupy movement did not start in Wall Street. It started in Madison, Wisconsin, in my state capital. And it wasn't until months later when we finally won those battles that they actually went on to Wall Street and around the rest of the country. So my apologies for starting that. But we did what we thought was important. You see, when back in 2009, about a year and a half before the election, Tonette and I sat down and talked about, thought about, ultimately prayed about the state of our state. And we saw that a state that had an unemployment rate peaked out at 9.2%, a state where under the previous governor we lost 133,000 jobs, where taxes had gone up by over $1 billion, by the governor, and Democrats were in charge before. We saw a state that was in trouble, and on behalf of our two sons, we said, we got to do something. And I'm proud to tell you, some 4+ years later, our state has turned around. But we couldn't have done it without the support of people helping us out, because you see, when they came in with all those protesters, they were trying to intimidate us. That's what they do at the state, at the federal, at the local level. They try to intimidate the big government special interests. Well, I'm proud to tell you tonight that we were not intimidated. It charged us with refocusing on why we were elected in the first place and the people we were elected to serve. And instead of backing down, we stood up and took the power out of the hands of the big government special interest and put it firmly in the hands of the hardworking taxpayers. You see, our reforms not only changed unions in our state, But we were able to change our economic status. We went from 9.2% unemployment at the beginning of 2010, 8.1% the month before I took office. So we're down to about 4.5% last month. We took it. We have a labor participation rate that's well above the national level. We had a $3.6 billion budget deficit, turned it into a surplus in each of the last years, balanced our budget moving forward. We have a rainy day fund that's 165 times bigger than we took office. The pension system, the only one fully funded in the country. We've done all the things you would expect economically and fiscally, but what I'm most proud of is how we changed state and local government. For example, in our schools, we now can hire and fire based on merit because we got rid of seniority and tenure. Remember back in 2011 how those protesters said public schools were going to fall apart if we did something like that? Well, I'm here to tell you 4 years later, graduation rates are up. Third grade reading scores are up. ACT scores are now second best in the country in states where the kids take the exam, have to take the exam. But it's not just in those areas. You see, we did other things as well. Sometimes people don't know about this because they hear about the unions. But we did other things. We reined in regulations. We got rid of frivolous lawsuits. We did more. We defunded Planned Parenthood and passed pro-life legislation. We passed castle doctrine and concealed carry so that people can protect themselves, their family, and their loved ones if they're law-abiding citizens. Who would have thought this, but we made Wisconsin the 25th state in the country to have the right to work, the freedom to work without being forced to be in a labor union. And in our state, it's now easy to vote, but hard to cheat. If you want to vote in the state of Wisconsin, you got to have a photo ID to vote in the next election. And so I tell all of you that, not to brag, well, maybe not too much, but rather tell you in a state like Wisconsin, a state that hasn't gone Republican for president since 1984 when Ronald Reagan last stood for re-election, if a state like that can take ideas that are big and bold and have them enacted and then elect a governor not just the first time, but a second time and a third time in 4 years, and not only elect a governor, but add additional seats in the majority, going from Democrat to Republican, to adding more Republicans, to adding even more Republicans last fall. If we can do it in Wisconsin, we can certainly do it in Washington and all across America. And let me give you 3 quick reasons why that's important for our country. It's all about growth, reform, and safety. You see, right now, I think we've got a lot of politicians in Washington who think we grow the economy by growing Washington. Well, I got a message for them. We grow the economy in cities and towns and villages all across this nation, that people create jobs, not the government. It's about time to get the government out of the way. That means reining in frivolous and out-of-control lawsuits, particularly all those new ones that the Obama administration had put in place. It means once and for all repealing Obamacare outright, fully, immediately, and putting patients and families back in charge. It means using the abundance of what God has given us here in this country and on this continent when it comes to fuel and energy supplies, with all of the above, not picking winners and losers, but using all that we have here in the West and all across the country, starting with improving the Keystone Pipeline on day one. It means not only through kindergarten through 12th grade, but beyond, helping people get the education and the skills and the qualifications they need to succeed in a way that says we're going to let the other side worry about how low wages are. We're going to get people the skills they need to succeed with careers that pay 2 or 3 or 4 times the minimum wage, because we want everyone to be lifted up in this economic recovery. And finally, it means lowering the burden when it comes to taxes. lowering the burden on hardworking taxpayers, whether it be individuals or on job creators, so that we're competitive again in the world today, so that more American jobs can come back home to put more of our fellow citizens back to work. Now, in addition to growth, we need to talk more about reform. Again, there's a huge contrast. Think about people like the President and Hillary Clinton. They tend to measure success in government by how many people are dependent on the government, right? I don't know about you, but I think for most of us in this country, we believe that success should be measured by just the opposite, by how many people are no longer dependent on the government. That's right. You see, we understand that true freedom and prosperity do not come from the mighty hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies through the dignity that is born of work. When I was a small kid growing up, we had moved to Delavan from Colorado Springs to Plainfield, Iowa, eventually to Delavan, Wisconsin when I was in third grade. And my first job was washing dishes at the Countryside Restaurant. Later in life, I moved up in the big time in high school. I started flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. True story, I was in Delavan. Paul Ryan, my good friend, was about 20 miles down the road from me in Janesville. He was flipping burgers there. I was flipping burgers at my home. The only difference is his manager told him he had to flip hamburgers in the back because he didn't have the interpersonal skills to work the front cash register. It's true. But regardless of that, I think about my time as a kid, growing up there working, learning that work ethic from those first jobs. And I think about my parents, my dad, a small-town preacher, my mom, a part-time secretary and a bookkeeper at one of the businesses in town. And I think about them and my grandparents, my mom's parents, my grandpa and grandma were farmers that didn't have indoor plumbing until my mother went off to junior high school. My dad's dad, my grandpa Walker, was a machinist for 42 years at Barbara Coleman. I look back in life, and for my brother and I, we realized we didn't inherit fame or fortune from our family. What we got was the belief that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you can do and be anything you want in America. That's the American dream, and we need to be champions for everyone to live the American dream. And finally, in addition to talking about growth and about reform, the last thing I want to spend a moment or two talking about is safety. Safety. You see, some people might think, what is he talking about? Safety. Is that public safety? Is it boater safety? Is it hunter safety? No. Safety to me is what many people in Washington call national security. But see, I call it safety because when I see a video of a Jordanian pilot burned alive in a cage, when I see Christians from Egypt and elsewhere around the world beheaded because of their faith, that's something I feel in my heart and in my soul. And that makes me worry for the safety of them and for others like them and for people all around this world, including me and my family. And I got to tell you, I think there's an increasing interest around this country and around this world for America to start leading again. You see, this may seem odd, but even though as a governor I don't deal with this every day, this has been at the top of my list of concerns for the last year or so. Because when I see a president who draws a line in the sand and allows people to cross it, when I see a president who calls ISIS the JV squad, who calls Yemen a success story, who calls Iran a place we can do business with, boy, that just troubles me. I remember as a kid back in 79 and 80, my brother David and I used to put yellow ribbons around the tree in front of our house, our oak tree in the front, because for 444 days, 52 Americans were held hostage in Iran. One of them is a friend of mine named Kevin Hermaning, who was the youngest Marine held hostage at that time. He grew up in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. He lives in Wausau right now. And I realized, watching what happened to Kevin back then, Iran has not changed. Iran is not a place we should do business with. And then I look at this president, earlier this year, he literally looked in the eyes of the American people and said, the greatest threat for future generations is climate change. It's climate change. Well, I got a message for you, Mr. President. The greatest threat for the American people, the greatest threat for the people of the world is not climate change. It is radical Islamic terrorism, and we need leaders who are willing to stand up and do something about it. We need a president who understands that Israel is actually an ally and will start treating her as such. And we need a president who has the courage to look the American people in the eye and tell them something that might not be easy to hear. You see, it's not going to take a week or a month or maybe even a year. But our enemy today is not like the enemy of the past. It's not like for those of us who grew up in the Cold War where containment was enough. No, our enemy today is like a virus. It's like a virus. If you don't take it out, it will only come back stronger. And as I look at the world today, on behalf of your children and mine, I'd rather take the fight to them instead of waiting till they bring the fight to us. And so there's a lot at stake at this next election. And there's a lot of great Republicans either thinking about or already in this race. But I would just ask one quick thing, and then I want to end with a quick story to bring this all home. I would ask, as you consider who you might support for president, that you think about the fact that there are really a great emerging group of Republican candidates, but they really kind of fall into two camps. There are fighters who have yet to win those battles. And there are winners who have yet to fight those battles. If we were to throw our hat in the ring, I would contend to you that we could do both. Fight those battles and win those battles on the issues that matter to everyday Americans to further our common sense conservative reforms. And so as we end, before I spend a few minutes sitting down with Hugh Hewitt and answering some questions for you here this evening, I just want to tell you I'm an optimist. I love America. I love the people of this country. I'm upset with the federal government, but I love America and the people of this great country, and I'm optimistic about the future. I'm optimistic not just because of what I've seen in my state, but in many other states across this country. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen common sense, conservative, Republican reformers take office in our states and transform those states moving forward. But more so than just what we've seen over the last few years, I'm an optimist because I love the history of America. And I know the history of America will lead us to better days to come. You see, as a kid, I grew up loving history so much, I thought of our founders as almost bigger than life. Superheroes in my mind. And so over the years, though, we never had a chance to go to Philadelphia. And a couple years back, Tonette and I, my wife and I, who's here with me tonight, we got a chance to go to Philadelphia for the first time. And as you can imagine, as someone who loved history and loved thinking about those remarkable founders, we got up early in the morning. We went over past the Liberty Bell, and with the Park Service, we went into Independence Hall. For any of you who've ever been there, you know it's pretty small. It's about a fraction of this stage we're on up here. And so as I got up there early in the morning, as the sun was coming up, and I looked into the room and kind of took it all in, I looked at the desk, and I looked at the chairs, and I was ready to be blown away. But instead, it dawned on me. These were ordinary people. These were ordinary people who'd done something quite extraordinary. You see, these were people who didn't just risk their political careers. These were people who didn't just risk their business ventures. These were patriots who risked their lives for the freedom we hold dear today. Ladies and gentlemen, here tonight, I would tell you that moments like that remind me that what makes America great, what makes us exceptional, what makes us the greatest country in the history of the world has been all throughout our nation's history. In times of crisis, be it economic or fiscal, be it military or spiritual, what makes America amazing, It's been all throughout those times. There have been men and women of courage who've been willing to think more about the future of their children and their grandchildren than they thought about their own futures. Ladies and gentlemen, here tonight, I would tell you that this is one of those times. This is one of those moments in history. This is the opportunity for us to look back and tell future generations, we were there. We stood up. We did what was required to make America great again. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for what you're going to do. Thank you for helping to make America great again.
Scott Walker, the fighter from Wisconsin. Governor Scott Walker. And now, welcome for a conversation with the governor, our friend Hugh Hewitt.
Governor, it is always a pleasure. You've got a bunch of young people here, the Armstrong Fellows somewhere out there. A lot of young fans. Governor, I'm going to make it quick because we've got a lot of people want to go dancing. They're conservatives. 4 questions. I heard you say Obamacare will be repealed and replaced. There are a lot of Republican senators who love the filibuster. Now, Rick Santorum told me you don't need to break the filibuster to repeal Obamacare. But if it's necessary to do so, will you urge your Republican colleagues to invoke the Harry Reid rule that he used last year to break the filibuster to repeal Obamacare root and branch?
Yes, absolutely.
Secondly, we've seen 2 Supreme Court decisions in 2 days disappoint. All judges disappoint. David Souter disappointed the most. How will you find originalists? How have you found originalists who will interpret the law and not make it?
Well, that's a great question. And again, it's one of those where I can do more than talk about it. I can point to my record. As governor, I take that very seriously. I'm not a lawyer. That's worth an applause right there, probably, right? I'm not a lawyer, although there are some good ones, so don't take that wrong, Hugh. But what I've done as my time as governor of the great state of Wisconsin, I take that very seriously because that's a legacy that will far outlast me no matter what the future might hold. And so I put together a group, including a number of folks very active in the Federalist Society in my state and across the country, as well as a number of other legal scholars, to help me narrow the group of applicants for any circuit court, Court of Appeals, or eventually someday a Supreme Court appointment in my state. They narrow it down. They give me a group of finalists, and then I interview them. And key to their involvement and mine as well are 3 simple litmus tests. I want men and women of integrity. I want people who are scholars and understand the law. And most importantly, I want to know that people understand with absolute certainty throughout a very deliberative background process and otherwise, that they understand that the sole role of the judiciary in the states and importantly in the country is to uphold the Constitution of the United States and those laws duly enacted under it, no more, no less.
My third question has to do with something I've been talking a lot about with the young Armstrong Fellows all week and with everyone in this audience.
If I just say Armstrong Fellows, do I get more applause out of that? See, that's pretty good, huh?
When it comes to religious liberty, I asked Jeb Bush this on my show on Friday. I ask you, are you all in? And if so, what's that mean?
Yes, and in my state, I'm proud to say that it's actually written into our Constitution in great detail. In fact, I remember when some of the other states early this year were having some challenges with the media and otherwise, I pointed out, we've had it in our Constitution for some time, and it's worked just fine, thank you. I think in our nation's Constitution, it may not be as detailed as it is in my state's Constitution, but I was just in Philadelphia last Saturday. You know, Philadelphia, William Penn, the founder of that great Commonwealth, came to America to set up what's now Pennsylvania, in large part because he was a victim of religious persecution. You think of him, people like Roger Williams, plenty of others who were part of the great founding of this country that we call America today. They came here in large part because they were facing religious persecution. To me, it is not freedom from religion, or it is freedom of religion, which ultimately means we have the right to practice our religious beliefs and not have others interfere. If we certainly should respect the opinions of others in America, but that in return means they not only respect our opinions, they respect what is written into the Constitution. The very first thing that the founders said should be amended to the Constitution was guaranteeing the freedom of religion. We need a president who's going to stand up and defend that each and every day.
And then finally, and this is a two-part question, we suffered a data breach 2 weeks ago, the OPM data breach. It's the worst data breach in American history. It's probably worse than Snowden. Millions of records of people's detailed lives, mine, people that I've worked with for years who filed these FS-86. The Chinese have it all. They can get into the witness protection program. They can investigate nuclear scientists. They can find anyone who's got any blackmailable issue. At the same time that happened, Mrs. Clinton was revealed to have a private server in her home. The indifference at the national level, the indifference at the personal level to the national security is shocking. Do you think it's disqualifying? And what does it say about the Obama administration? And will you make Hillary's server an issue in the 2016 election? And if so, how?
Well, you opened a big door for me there. But first off, I just got to say, and this is funny, but I just wish it wasn't funny. It's probably true today that China and maybe even Russia probably know more about what was on Hillary Clinton's server than do the members of the United States Senate, or the United States Congress, I should say. I don't think that's that far off either, because anyone who thinks if they could hack into agencies of the federal government for someone who had a private server that was clearly not secured, and let's just assume for the moment, for the sake of argument, that she didn't have confidential information on, although we don't know, because she has clearly not been fully transparent with what was on there. At a minimum, it was sensitive information. And so I think the American people have got to look at a pattern. I think there's a larger issue than and this alone would be a serious offense in terms of a political issue. But I think it's part of a larger pattern. When you look at this, when you look at parallel to this, the idea that the Clintons could believe that while one of them was Secretary of the State, the other could be doing speeches on behalf of foreign governments and being paid millions of dollars for that. I think any high school freshman taking an ethics course could tell you that's a conflict of interest. When you look at this pattern, what it tells to me is the Clintons think there is a different set of rules for them than there is for the rest of America. And I think that goes to a larger issue that says Hillary Clinton is woefully out of touch with Main Street America, and it's about time we stand up and point it out, even if the Main Street media is not going to do it.
Everybody says Scott Walker's a winner. He stood up against everything the left could throw at him, not once, not twice, but 3 times. But Hillary wasn't in the ring. And the Clinton machine is big. They got the money. They got most of the media. They got the map. They've got a machine. So tell us all, tell everyone. I think the key thing I'm going to be looking for when I ask debate questions this fall is who's the Republican best position to take on and beat Hillary Clinton? Why is that Scott Walker?
I'd tell you 3 quick reasons. And I'm not a declared unit, but if I were to declare...
If you were to declare.
I give you 3 quick reasons why that would be a good argument if I was the declared candidate. 1, if we're going to beat a name from the past, we need a name from the future. Not a name from the past. 2, if we're going to beat someone who embodies Washington, and Hillary Clinton embodies Washington not just because she's worked there for most of her professional life, but because of things like this email and the cover-up and the scandal. That's what we expect out of Washington. We need someone who's the anti-Washington. And I think if you look at us taking on the big government special interests, most of whom came out of Washington to spend $100 million or more to take us out, we took on Washington not once, not twice, but 3 times in the last 4 years, and we won. So we're the anti-Washington. And 3, I'm going to actually answer the question that the gentleman asked me, so that's all right.
I'll get to it.
I'm used to protesters, so this is not uncommon. Probably exported in from Wisconsin. But the third reason, the third compelling argument is that unlike Hillary Clinton, who even when you ask her supporters, they can't identify anything that she's accomplished of substance other than traveling around the world. The contrast with that is that we've actually done something. We've actually gotten something done. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of great Republicans who are fighters. There's a lot of great Republicans who are winners. We fought and won, and we could do that if we were to run.
Hey, I got to ask you. This must be like T-ball for you, is it?
Hey, when you've had 100,000 protesting and death threats in front of your house, one or two guys shout.
God, that's like
it's
softball.
like, what's the big deal?
Scott Walker, congratulations, brother.
Thanks.